The town of Midway, Tennessee was nothing special on the map of America. Small, well-kept houses surrounded by greenery, wide streets, and friendly residents who had known each other since childhood. At the corner of Myrtle Avenue and Oak Street stood a two-story house with a neat lawn and lush hydrangeas along the path to the porch. This was the home of the Tate family: Henry, Christine, and their two children, 10-year-old Jacob and 7-year-old Zoe. Henry Tate had been a taxi driver for 15 years. He started out with a large company, but after saving up enough money, he bought his own car and went into business for himself. Almost everyone in Midvale knew his black checkered sedan. At 40, he looked fit and energetic. His dark skin glowed with health, and his brown eyes always showed a willingness to help anyone in need. Christina, his wife, worked as an administrator at Midway Smiles, the most popular dental clinic in town. A slender woman with short curly hair and a dazzling smile, which was very useful for her job, she always radiated kindness. At 35, she had retained the figure and lively personality that had once captured Henry's heart at their high school prom. The Tates had met as teenagers and married when Christina was 20 and Henry was 25. They were the kind of couple that their neighbors looked at with admiration and a touch of envy. So many years together and still holding hands as they walked in the evenings. On an early fall Sunday morning, Henry was working his magic at the grill in the backyard, turning juicy steaks that smelled delicious throughout the neighborhood. Christina carried a plate of vegetable salad out of the house, and the children ran around the yard playing tag. "Hey, slow down there!" Henry called, but there was no sternness in his voice, only laughter. "Zoe, don't run so fast. You know your brother can't catch you." Zoe stopped, stuck her tongue out at her brother, and started running again, her dark pigtails bouncing in time with her steps. Christina walked over to her husband and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "The steaks are almost ready," Henry said, turning to her. "Where's Aiden? He promised to bring his special sauce." "There he is." Christina pointed to the neighboring plot, where a tall man with a small jar in his hands was heading toward them. Aiden Clark had been Henry's best friend since school. He worked as a postman, and despite his busy schedule, 6 days a week of running around the neighborhood with a bag was no easy task. He always found time for the Tate family. A 42-year-old bachelor with a good-natured smile and a keen eye, he was like an uncle to the Tate children and a brother Henry never had. "Here I am!" Aiden waved the jar. "I made it according to a special recipe, added a little cayenne pepper." "Great!" Henry patted his friend on the shoulder. "Kids, look who's here!" Jacob and Zoe immediately forgot about their game and ran to Aiden. He crouched down, opening his arms, and the children squealed and hung on his neck. "Uncle Aiden, did you bring us something?" Zoe asked hopefully. "Zoe!" Christina shook her head. "We don't do that." "It's okay." Aiden laughed and took 2 small toys in bright wrappers out of his pocket. "Of course I did. When have I ever come empty-handed?" These Sunday barbecues were a Tate family tradition. Every week they got together with Aiden, sometimes inviting other neighbors or colleagues, but most often it was just their small family circle with the addition of their best friend. After lunch, Henry and Aiden sat in deck chairs, sipping cold beer and watching Christina read a book to the children on a blanket spread out on the grass. "How's work?" Aiden asked, leaning back in his deck chair. "Same as usual." Henry shrugged. "You know, the same old. Airport, train station, hospital, shopping mall, driving around all day. Sometimes you get interesting passengers, but most of the time people just sit there staring at their phones. How's Christina? How's the clinic?" "Everything seems fine." Henry took a sip of beer. "She's been staying late more often than usual lately. She says they have some new patient registration system and has to transfer all the files to the computer." Aiden nodded, looking closely at his friend. "How are you? Are you still buried in mail?" "We're managing," Aiden smiled. "Although people are writing fewer letters, mostly catalogs and bills." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's laughter. Zoe climbed onto her father's back, demanding a ride. Henry eagerly got down on all fours and galloped around the yard, pretending to be a horse, while Zoe squealed with delight. Jacob, not wanting to be left out, climbed onto Aiden, who also began racing around the lawn, competing with Henry in speed and agility. Christina watched them with a smile, shielding her eyes from the bright sun with her hand. Her face glowed with happiness, and Henry, catching her gaze, felt his heart fill with warmth. Here she was, his life, everything he had ever dreamed of, everything he needed. In the evening, when the children were asleep and Aiden had gone to his room, Henry and Christina sat on the porch, enjoying the cool evening air. "It was a good day," Henry said, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Yes," Christina said, resting her head on his shoulder. "A very good one." "You've been working a lot lately," Henry remarked, stroking her hand. "Maybe you should take a vacation? Go somewhere together?" "Not now," Christina shook her head. "We really do have a lot of work. Dr. Lewis hired a new assistant and we have to train him. And yes, this new accounting system." She sighed. "Let's talk about it later, okay?" Henry nodded, not noticing her averting her gaze. After all, everyone had difficult periods at work. The main thing was that everything was fine at home. Their usual life flowed steadily and predictably. Henry woke up at 5 in the morning to get the early passengers to the airport. Christina made breakfast for the children and took them to school before leaving for the clinic at 8. In the evenings, they had dinner together, helped the children with their homework, and then watched TV or played board games. On weekends, if Henry wasn't working, they would go out as a family, to the park, the movies, or the fair in a neighboring town. Aiden often joined them, and then the fun became even more boisterous and joyful. On Thursday, Henry came home earlier than usual. It hadn't been a very busy day, so he decided to surprise Christine by cooking dinner. She had been looking tired lately, and he wanted to make his wife happy. When Christine came home with the children, her favorite spaghetti with seafood and avocado salad was already on the table. "Wow!" she exclaimed when she saw the table set. "What are we celebrating? Do I need a special occasion to make my wife happy?" Henry smiled, kissing her on the cheek. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms to do their homework, Henry suggested watching a movie. "Sure," Christina agreed, but then her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and frowned slightly. "Sorry, I have to answer that. It's work." She went into another room, and Henry couldn't help but listen to her voice. Christina spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, and at one point she laughed, easily and freely, as she used to laugh only with him. When she returned, her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyes sparkled. "Everything okay?" Henry asked. "Yes, of course." Christina sat down next to him on the sofa. "Dr. Lewis just told a funny story about a patient. So what's the movie?" Henry turned on a comedy they had been wanting to see for a long time, but noticed that Christina kept glancing at her phone lying nearby. She seemed to be waiting for another call or message. During the movie, Christina's phone vibrated several times with incoming messages, but she didn't answer it, just glanced at the screen. "Why don't you answer it?" Henry suggested. "It looks important." No, Christina shook her head. "Nothing urgent, just a work chat. I'll check it later." She moved closer to her husband and rested her head on his shoulder, as she always did. But Henry sensed a tension in her body, as if she were here and not here at the same time. The next day, when Henry returned from work, he found Christina talking on the phone in the backyard. She didn't notice him and continued her conversation, pacing across the lawn. "It won't work tomorrow," she said, lowering her voice. "I have an important meeting in the morning. No, I can't cancel. Okay, let's do it on Monday." "Yes, me too." Noticing her husband, Christina fell silent and quickly ended the conversation. "Who was that?" Henry asked, trying to sound casual. "Tamara," Christina replied, referring to her colleague. "We were discussing work." "So late?" Henry glanced at his watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. "It's the end of the quarter. Lots of reports," Christina explained as she walked past him into the house. "How was your day?" Henry told her about his travels, about a funny tourist from Germany who kept trying to speak broken English with a southern accent, and about how he gave a ride to an old lady who turned out to be a former music teacher and knew half of Midway. Christina listened, smiled, and asked questions, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that her mind was somewhere else. At dinner, Zoe talked about the drawing her teacher had put on the honor board, and Jacob bragged about being selected for the school math competition. "That's wonderful, son," Henry patted the boy on the head. Your mother and I are very proud of you. When is the competition? Christina asked. I need to mark it on my calendar so I can ask for time off work. Next Wednesday, Jacob replied, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Christina froze for a moment, then nodded. Of course I'll be there. Me too, Henry added. Nothing will stop us from cheering you on. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Henry stepped out onto the porch and saw Aiden returning from his evening run. Hey, buddy, he called to his neighbor. Got a minute? Aiden approached, wiping sweat from his face with a towel. Sure. What's up? Nothing, Henry shrugged. Just wanted to talk. We haven't had a heart-to-heart in a while. They sat down on the porch steps. Henry brought 2 bottles of beer from the fridge. How's it going? Aiden asked, taking a sip of beer. You seem tense. I don't know. Henry twirled the bottle in his hands. I feel like Christina's been kind of different lately. She's always on her phone, staying late at work, whispering. She's probably just going through a rough patch at work, Aiden suggested. You told me about the new system and everything. Yeah, probably, Henry agreed, but without much conviction. It's just, have you noticed anything strange when you're at our place? Aiden thought for a moment. No, everything's normal. Christina's the same as always. Caring, attentive, maybe a little tired, but who isn't these days? Henry nodded, feeling slightly ashamed of his suspicions. Of course, everything was fine. People go through periods when work demands more attention and energy. Christina loved him and the children. There was no doubt about that. You're right, he said, tapping his bottle against his friend's. I'm just getting myself worked up. They talked for another hour, reminiscing about their school days, discussing the latest sports news, and making vacation plans. When Aiden left, Henry felt lighter. Yes, everything was fine between him and Christina. Life just threw challenges at them sometimes, but they would get through them, as they always had. Tuesday was a busy day for Henry. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since early morning, with calls from regular customers coming in one after another. By lunchtime, he had made 8 trips, taking passengers to various parts of Midway and even to a neighboring town. It wasn't until 1:30 that he managed to find time for lunch. He parked his black sedan near Lorraine's, a small cafe famous for its chicken sandwiches and homemade lemonade. Henry had just placed his order when his phone vibrated again. The screen lit up with Aiden's name. Henry smiled and answered the call. Hey, buddy, how's it going at the post office? Instead of his usual cheerful greeting, Aiden replied in an unexpectedly tense voice. Henry, are you busy right now? We need to talk. Something in his friend's tone made Henry wary. I'm having lunch at Lorraine's. Did something happen? Aiden paused for a second, then said, I just saw Christina. And? Henry didn't understand what his friend was getting at. She should be at work. At the clinic. Exactly. Aiden's voice sounded alarmed. But she's not at the clinic. She's at Hot Crust. Hot Crust was a pizza place that had opened in Midvale about a year ago. The owner, Derek Johnson, had quickly gained popularity with his unusual pizzas with secret sauces. Maybe she's just ordering lunch, Henry suggested, but he was already starting to feel uneasy. Listen, Aiden said quietly and quickly. I was delivering mail to the store next door and saw them through the window. They were sitting at a table in the far corner. Derek was holding her hand. Henry. They looked very close. Henry felt a lump rise in his throat and his heart begin to beat faster. Are you sure it was Christina? Absolutely. The blue dress you gave her for her last birthday. I recognized it. Henry closed his eyes. The blue dress with the floral print. He had indeed given it to Christina, and she rarely wore it, only on special occasions. What special occasion was today? Lunch with the owner of a pizza place. But maybe it's a business meeting. Henry still didn't want to believe the worst. Maybe the clinic is ordering pizza for some kind of event. Henry, Aiden sighed. I know what business meetings look like. This was different. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he cares deeply about. And she laughed the way she hadn't laughed in your presence in a long time. Those words stabbed Henry in the heart like a sharp knife. He remembered how Christina had really changed lately. The constant phone calls, the late nights at work, the aloofness. "Where are you now?" Henry asked, already getting up from the table and leaving his order untouched. "I'm in my car, parked across the street from the pizzeria. Don't go anywhere. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Henry quickly paid the bill, apologized to the waitress, and ran out into the street. His hands were shaking slightly as he started the car. Fragments of memories flashed through his mind. Their wedding, the birth of their children, Sunday barbecues, where they looked like the perfect family. Had it all been just an illusion? Exactly 9 minutes later, Henry parked next to Aiden's car. His friend was sitting in the driver's seat, and seeing Henry, motioned for him to join him. Henry got into Aiden's car. "They're still there," Aiden said, nodding toward the pizzeria across the street. Same table. Henry followed his gaze and saw his wife's familiar profile through the large window of the pizzeria. She was sitting sideways to the window, and her face was not completely visible, but it was definitely Christina. Across from her sat a man, Derek Johnson, tall, fit, with a short haircut and a well-groomed beard. He was leaning over the table, talking animatedly. Christina was laughing, her head thrown back. "Maybe we should just go in and ask what's going on," Aiden suggested. Henry shook his head. "No, I want to see how serious this is. Let's wait and see what happens." They sat in the car for about 20 minutes. Finally, they saw Derek get up from the table and hold out his hand to Christina. She got up and they walked toward the exit together. "They're leaving," Aiden whispered. "What should we do?" "Let's keep watching," Henry replied, feeling his insides tighten with fear and rage at the same time. Derek and Christine left the pizzeria. Instead of going their separate ways, they walked down the street together holding hands. Henry and Aiden exchanged glances. "Let's follow them," Henry said. Aiden started the car, and they slowly followed, keeping their distance. Derek and Christina turned the corner and entered a small cafe called The Blue Cat, a cozy place with small tables and dim lighting, known as a romantic spot for dates. "Damn," Henry cursed. "This doesn't look like a business meeting anymore." They parked so they could see the cafe, but remain unnoticed. Through the large window, they could see Derek and Christina sitting at a table in the back. The cafe was almost empty, with only a few customers scattered around, giving the couple plenty of privacy. "We can go in and sit nearby," Aiden suggested. "We'll pretend we stopped in for a bite to eat." Henry thought about it, but then shook his head. "No, I want to see what happens next, when they think no one is watching them." They continued watching from the car. Through the window, they could see the waiter bring their drinks, and Derek and Christina clinked glasses. Even from that distance, Henry could see Christina's face glow, an expression he had only seen in her during the first years of their marriage. "Henry," Aiden said quietly, "maybe we're wrong. Maybe it's not what it seems." But at that moment, something happened that dispelled all doubts. Derek leaned across the table and kissed Christina. Not a friendly kiss on the cheek, but a real, long kiss on the lips. And Christina responded by placing her hand on his cheek and gently stroking his beard. Henry felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. His ears rang and black spots floated before his eyes. He grabbed the door handle to keep his balance. "My God," Aiden whispered. "Henry, I'm so sorry." But Henry couldn't hear him anymore. Only one thought echoed in his head. All 15 years of their marriage had been a lie. The woman he loved more than life itself, with whom he had raised children and made plans for the future, was now kissing another man in some cafe, not even trying to hide. Suddenly, Henry straightened up and took out his phone. "What are you doing?" Aiden asked. "I need proof." Henry's voice sounded strangely calm. "Otherwise, she'll say I made it all up." He got out of the car and, hiding behind passers-by, moved closer to the cafe window. Derek and Christina were still sitting at the table, now holding hands and talking. From time to time, they leaned toward each other and exchanged short kisses. Henry raised his phone and took several pictures. Christina's face was clearly visible, her happy smile and tender gaze directed at Derek. He took a couple more pictures as they kissed again, then quickly got back into the car. "Let's go," he said to Aiden, putting his phone in his pocket. "Where?" Aiden asked, surprised. "Don't you want to talk to her? Sort things out?" "Not now." Henry shook his head. "I need to think, and I don't know if I can keep my cool if I go up to them right now. Aiden nodded silently and started the car. They drove away from the cafe and headed toward Henry's house. What are you going to do? Aiden asked when they were halfway there. Henry was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the houses and trees passing by. I don't know, he finally replied. I have to think about the kids. They shouldn't suffer because of this. Are you going to tell her you know? Not yet. Henry ran his hand over his face. I want to understand how serious this is. Maybe it's just a fling. Maybe everything can be fixed. But even as he said the words, he knew he didn't believe them. What he had seen in the cafe was not a casual fling or a moment of weakness. Christina had looked at Derek the way she used to look at him, with love and desire. If there's anything I can do, Aiden began, but Henry interrupted him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've already helped, my friend. If it weren't for you, I would have continued living in ignorance, and she would have continued lying to my face. They arrived at Henry's house, and Aiden stopped the car. Do you want me to come with you? He offered. No, Henry shook his head. I need to be alone, to think about all this. Call me if you need anything. Aiden squeezed his friend's shoulder. Anytime, day or night, you hear me? Henry nodded, trying to smile, but instead of a smile, a painful grimace appeared on his face. Thanks, Aiden, for everything. He got out of the car and headed for the house. The children wouldn't be home from school for another 2 hours, and Christina usually came home from work around 6. He had time to prepare to greet his wife and pretend that everything was fine. As he entered the house, Henry felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Pain, hurt, anger, confusion. How could she? After all these years together, after everything they had been through? He walked into the living room and sank down onto the sofa. Their family photo stared back at him from the frame on the wall. Christina with the children, all smiling, and him hugging them from behind. A happy family. A perfect picture that hid betrayal. Henry took out his phone and looked again at the photos taken in the cafe. In one of them, Christina was laughing, her head thrown back, and Derek was looking at her adoringly. In another, they were kissing, and Christina's hand was gently touching his face. Damn it! Henry threw his phone on the sofa and covered his face with his hands. He remembered all the strange things Christina had done over the past few months. The frequent delays at work, the mysterious phone calls, her aloofness. It all fit together. How could he have been so blind? When the initial shock subsided, Henry began to think about the situation more rationally. He needed a plan. He couldn't just barge in and cause a scene. That would traumatize the children. But he couldn't go on living a lie either. He decided to pretend he knew nothing for the time being. That would give him time to observe Christina, perhaps learn more about her relationship with Derek, and make a considered decision. When the children came home from school, Henry greeted them with a smile, helped them with their homework, and made dinner, just as he always did. Looking at Jacob and Zoe, he felt a sharp pain. What would happen to them if the family fell apart? At 6 o'clock, Henry heard the key turn in the lock. Christina was home from work. He took a deep breath, preparing for the most difficult performance of his life. Hi. Christina entered the kitchen, smiling. She looked fresh and rested, her eyes sparkling. How was your day? Fine. Henry tried to smile back. And yours? The usual routine, she said, coming over and kissing him on the cheek. The same mouth that had kissed another man just a few hours ago. Lots of patience, lots of paperwork. Henry felt his insides tighten at her lie, so casual and natural. How many times had she lied to him like that, looking him straight in the eye? I made dinner, he said, turning away toward the stove. The kids have done their homework. You're the best, Christina smiled and went to change. During dinner, Henry watched his wife closely. She talked animatedly with the children, asked them about their day, laughed at Jacob's jokes. Nothing in her behavior betrayed any sense of guilt or anxiety. She looked happy and relaxed, perhaps even happier than usual. You're in a good mood today, Henry remarked, trying to sound casual. Really? Christina shrugged. I'm probably just glad the work week is coming to an end. I've had a stressful few days. Of course, Henry thought. It's hard to juggle work, family, and a lover. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms and Christina was doing the dishes, Henry sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. In reality, he wasn't paying attention to the screen, completely lost in his thoughts. Something had broken inside him today, something important and irreplaceable, the trust that had been the foundation of their relationship. Even if Christina decided to end the affair, would he ever be able to trust her again? Would he be able to look at her and not see those photos? Would he be able to touch her, knowing that her body had belonged to another man? Christina entered the living room and sat down next to him on the sofa, as she had done hundreds of times before. She snuggled up to him, resting her head on his shoulder, and Henry smelled her shampoo, the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla, which now seemed foreign and fake. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, looking at the TV screen. "Nothing in particular," Henry lied, surprised at how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. Maybe he had always been able to lie, but there had never been a need. Just tired. Hard day? Yeah, a lot of driving. They sat in silence, staring at the screen but not seeing it. Each was lost in their own thoughts. I wonder if Christina was thinking about Derek at that moment. Was she comparing them? Was she planning another meeting? At 10 o'clock, they went to bed. Henry lay next to his wife, listening to her steady breathing, and felt rage and pain tearing him apart inside. He wanted to scream, to shake her by the shoulders and demand an explanation, to find out why she had betrayed him, their family, their love. But he remained silent, for the sake of the children, for the sake of maintaining at least the appearance of normality until he decided what to do next. All these years, he had believed that they had a perfect marriage. Of course, there were difficulties and arguments, as in any family, but the foundation had always remained strong, their love and respect for each other. Or so he thought. When Christina was fast asleep, Henry quietly got out of bed and went out into the backyard. The night air was cool, and the stars were shining brightly in the sky. He sat down on the steps of the porch and took out his phone. The photos looked even more cruel in the moonlight. Christina and Derek, lost in each other, oblivious to everyone around them. Lovers enjoying their secret happiness. Henry felt a dark, heavy rage building inside him. He had lived with this woman for 15 years, given her everything he could. Love, stability, a family, and she threw it all away for some pizza shop owner. Suddenly, a plan began to form in Henry's mind. It was Christina's birthday in 2 weeks. They had planned, as usual, to have a party at home with family and friends. What if... Henry smiled as he looked up at the starry sky. Yes, that's it. He would give Christina a special gift, one she would never forget, one that would show everyone who she really was. The next 2 weeks were a real test for Henry. Every morning he woke up with a heaviness in his chest that never left him for a moment. Every evening he came home and put on the mask of a happy husband and father, even though a storm was raging inside him. Christina seemed oblivious. She continued to live her normal life, going to work, taking care of the children, cooking dinner. Only now did Henry see the falseness in her behavior. She began to look at her phone more often, stay out late, and even missed 2 family dinners, citing urgent work matters. 3 days before Christina's birthday, Henry went to the mall and bought a beautiful gift box, large enough to hold a medium-sized pizza. He chose elegant wrapping paper with a silver pattern and a wide blue ribbon. Christina loved the color blue. The saleswoman smiled as she wrapped the empty box and hoped that his wife would like the gift. If only she knew. That evening, Henry called Hot Crust Pizza and placed a pre-order for Christina's birthday. Seafood pizza was her favorite. Derek Johnson answered the phone himself and kindly took the order, unaware that he was talking to his mistress's husband. "Delivery will be at 6 o'clock on Saturday," Derek confirmed. "Perfect," Henry replied, feeling a strange satisfaction at how smoothly everything was going. The day before the birthday, Henry printed out photos of Christina and Derek at a cafe. He chose the most vivid ones, where they were holding hands, kissing, and where Christina was looking at her lover with adoration. The photos were clear, leaving no doubt as to who was in them. On the morning of Christina's birthday, Henry got up earlier than usual and made her breakfast, pancakes with maple syrup and fresh fruit. The children helped him set the table and decorate the kitchen with balloons and garlands. Zoe drew a card for her mother, and Jacob made a beaded bracelet in school. When Christina came downstairs, everything looked perfect. A happy family getting ready to celebrate the birthday of their beloved wife and mother. "Happy birthday, Mom!" the children shouted, rushing to hug Christina. "Thank you, my darlings." She kissed them on the tops of their heads, then looked up at Henry. "And thank you, too." "Everything is so beautiful." Henry smiled, trying to make it look natural. "Only the best for you, dear." Christina came over and hugged him, resting her head on his shoulder. Henry hugged her back, smelling her familiar perfume and fighting the urge to push her away. "The party starts at 5, he said, pulling away. "I invited your parents, Tamra and her husband, Aiden, and a few other friends. Nothing too grand, just like you wanted." "Sounds great." Christina smiled and sat down at the table where her breakfast was waiting for her. The day was spent getting ready. Henry ordered a cake from the best bakery in town, bought champagne, and prepared some appetizers. The children helped decorate the house, and Christina, at Henry's insistence, went to the beauty salon. He said it was part of his gift. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The large table in the living room was beautifully set. Garlands were hung in the backyard, and the house sparkled with cleanliness. Henry looked at it all and thought how deceptive the outward picture of happiness could be. The guests began to arrive at 5 o'clock sharp. The first to arrive were Christina's parents, Thomas and Elaine Grant. They were followed by Tamra and her husband Eric, then a few more friends, and finally Aiden. Jacob and Zoe's godfather brought a huge bouquet of roses and a small box with earrings. Christina had been eyeing them in a jewelry store for a long time. Henry noticed the worried look Aiden gave him, but pretended that everything was fine. They hadn't talked about the surveillance since it happened. Henry had told his friend he wanted to deal with it himself, and Aiden respected his decision. Christina returned from the beauty salon in a new dress, dark blue accentuating her figure. She had her hair done and looked simply stunning. The guests admired her, and compliments rained down on her from all sides. Looking at her, so beautiful and confident, Henry felt a twinge of pain again. How could she have betrayed him? The party went on as usual. The guests talked, laughed, and shared news. Christina moved from one group to another, accepting congratulations and gifts which were piling up on a separate table. Henry watched her out of the corner of his eye while playing the role of a gracious host, pouring champagne, offering snacks, and keeping the conversation going. At 5:30, the doorbell rang. Henry knew who it was and went to open the door himself. Standing on the doorstep was a delivery man from Hot Crust with a box of pizza in his hands. "Order from Mr. Tate," said the young man. "Thank you," Henry said, paying generously and taking the box. Returning to the living room, he quietly slipped into the kitchen, where a gift box had already been prepared. He quickly opened the pizza box, placed the printed photos on top, closed it, and put everything in a beautiful gift box. Tying a blue ribbon into a neat bow, he returned to the living room, where the festivities were in full swing. By 6 o'clock, when everyone had eaten and drunk champagne, Thomas Grant, Christina's father, tapped his fork on his glass to get everyone's attention. "I think it's time for presents," he announced, and the guests nodded in agreement. Christina sat down in an armchair, and the guests formed a semicircle around her. One by one, they approached her and handed her their gifts: perfume from her parents, a silk scarf from Tamra and Eric, a book from her colleagues, earrings from Aiden. Christina opened each gift with a smile, thanked the giver, and hugged them. Finally, it was Henry's turn. He stepped forward with a beautifully wrapped box in his hands. "I saved my gift for last," he said with a smile. "I think it's special." The room fell silent. Christina smiled, looking at her husband expectantly. Henry handed her the box, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were shining with anticipation. His were cold as ice. "Thank you, dear." Christina took the box and began to carefully untie the ribbon. The guests watched with interest, especially Christina's parents. Henry was famous for his thoughtful gifts. When the ribbon was untied, Christina began to unwrap the wrapping paper. Opening the box, she saw a pizza box inside and raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Pizza?" She laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Open it," Henry said, and something in his voice made Christina tense. She slowly opened the pizza box and froze. On top of the fragrant seafood pizza were photos of her with Derek Johnson in a cafe. They were holding hands, kissing, looking at each other with undisguised tenderness. Christina's face turned pale. She looked up at Henry, her eyes wide with horror. "What? What is this?" she whispered. "I thought you'd tell me," Henry replied calmly. "For example, who is this man you're kissing?" A dead silence hung in the room. The guests looked at each other, not understanding what was happening. Tamara, Christina's best friend, stood up from her seat, trying to see what was in the box. "Henry," Christina's voice trembled. "Let's talk about this in private." "Why?" Henry spread his arms. "Do you have secrets from our friends and family? From people who came to wish you a happy birthday?" He took one of the photos out of the box and held it up for everyone to see. "This is the real face of my wife," he said loudly. "While I was working and taking care of our children, she was having fun with the owner of the pizza place." The guests gasped. Christina's parents looked at each other with horror on their faces. Tamara covered her mouth with her hand. "You were following me?" Christina jumped up, clutching the photos in her hand. Her voice was full of indignation, but Henry detected a hint of fear. "I didn't have to," he replied. "You were seen in town. You didn't even try to hide." Christina glanced around at the guests, seeking support, but met only shocked and condemning looks. "I can explain," she began, but Henry cut her off. "There's no need. The photos speak for themselves. I just wanted everyone to know that my marriage was a lie. I wanted everyone to see who you really are." Christina's parents rose from their seats. Elaine Grant approached her daughter and whispered, "We think we'll be going." Other guests began to rise, muttering embarrassed apologies. No one knew how to react to such a situation. The public exposure of infidelity at a holiday dinner was beyond the bounds of normal social etiquette. "No, wait!" Christina tried to stop them, but no one wanted to remain at the center of a family scandal. Thomas Grant approached Henry and placed his hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly. "We'll talk later, when everyone has calmed down." Aidan was the last to leave. He glanced anxiously at Henry, but Henry nodded slightly. Everything was fine. Go on. When the door closed behind the last guest, the house fell silent. The children, sensing the tension, had gone to their rooms in the middle of the argument. Henry and Christina were left alone in the living room, where just a minute ago there had been a party. "How could you?" Christina broke the silence. Her voice rang with anger. "How could you do this in front of my parents? In front of our friends?" "How could you?" Henry retorted. "How could you cheat on me and then come home, look me in the eye, sleep in the same bed?" Christina turned away, unable to find an answer. "I loved you, Henry," she finally said. "I swear I did, but then everything changed. We changed." "What exactly changed?" Henry took a step toward her. "What did I do wrong?" "It's not you." Christina shook her head. "You've always been a good husband, a good father. But over the past 15 years, everything has become so predictable. I felt like I was turning into a shadow of myself. And then Derek came along, and with him," she fell silent, but Henry already understood. "He made you feel alive," he finished for her. "With me it was boring, mundane, but with him it was exciting and new." Christina was silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. "How long has this been going on?" Henry asked. 3 months, she replied quietly. "And you love him?" Christina looked up, and Henry saw the answer in her eyes before she even spoke. "Yes." The short word sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the room. "And now what?" Henry asked, feeling anger rising inside him. "Are you going to leave him? Leave us and the children?" "I would never leave the children," Christina said firmly. "But our marriage?" "Henry, he died long before I met Derek." Henry laughed, but it was a frightening laugh devoid of joy. "Died? No, Christina, you killed him. With your betrayal, your lies." He moved closer, clenching his fists. "I gave you everything, everything. And what did I get in return?" Christina took a step back, suddenly realizing how angry he was. "Henry, calm down," she said. raising her hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Let's talk when you're calmer." She turned and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" Henry asked. "To pack my things," she replied without turning around. "I'll spend the night at my parents' house. I'll come back for the kids tomorrow and we'll talk about everything." Henry followed her up the stairs, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. "That's it? You're just leaving? After everything you've done?" Christina entered the bedroom and took a travel bag out of the closet. "What did you expect, Henry?" She began to pack her things. "After what you did today, you thought we'd just go on living like before?" Henry watched her methodically gather her things, clothes, cosmetics, chargers. Her movements were calm and confident, as if she had been planning this step for a long time. "You planned this," he said, and it was not a question but a statement. "You were just waiting for the right moment to leave." "No," Christina shook her head, "but I knew it would happen sooner or later. Derek and I, we want to be together." She closed her bag and turned toward the door, but Henry blocked her way. "You can't just walk out," he said. "Get out of my way, Henry!" Christina's voice was firm. "Don't make this any harder." She tried to push past him, but Henry grabbed her arm. "You destroyed our family," he hissed. "You destroyed everything we built over 15 years. For what? For some guy with a pizza place?" Christina tried to pull her hand away, but Henry held on tight. "Let me go," she said, her voice tinged with fear. "You're hurting me." "And you," Henry pulled her closer, "did you think about how much you're hurting me? The children?" There was a rustling in the hallway. Jacob stood in the doorway of his room, looking fearfully at his parents. "Dad? Mom? What's going on?" Christina used this moment to break free from Henry's grip. "Everything's fine, dear," she said to her son, trying to keep her voice calm. "Mommy's just going on a little trip. Not for long." "Where?" Jacob asked, looking from his mother to his father. "To Grandma and Grandpa's," Christina replied. "Go to bed, sweetie. Everything's fine." Jacob nodded uncertainly and disappeared into his room. Christina turned to Henry, her eyes warning him. "Not in front of the children, Henry, please." She walked past him and headed down the stairs. Henry followed her, feeling rage and despair mixing inside him, forming an explosive mixture. At the front door, Christina stopped and turned to him. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. "We'll discuss everything like adults. We'll decide what to do about the house, the children." "You're not taking the children," Henry interrupted. "You betrayed us all. They're staying with me." "The court will decide," Christina replied calmly. "Now I'm leaving." She turned toward the door, and something broke inside Henry. The thought of her leaving, going back to Derek, laughing with him, sharing his bed, and then coming back to take the children was unbearable. He grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her toward him. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice strangely calm. Christina looked into his eyes and saw something in them for the first time that truly frightened her. "Henry," she tried to break free, "let me go. You're not yourself." "And you?" He shook her. "Are you out of your mind? How could you destroy our life? Our family?" Christina threw down her bag and tried to push him away, but Henry was stronger. He pinned her against the wall, his face contorted with rage. "Henry, stop!" Christina began to scream. "You're scaring me!" But Henry couldn't hear her anymore. Images flashed before his eyes. Christina with Derek, their kisses, their happy faces, how they would live together, raise his children. His hands closed around her neck. Christina tried to fight him off, scratching his hands, but Henry's grip was strong. He watched as the life drained from her eyes, as her movements grew weaker and then stopped altogether. When he finally let her go, Christina slid down the wall and lay motionless on the floor. Her eyes were open, but her gaze was empty. Henry stood over her, breathing heavily, gradually realizing what he had done. The rage subsided, replaced by horror and despair. "Christina!" He knelt down beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Christina, wake up!" But it was too late. Her neck was covered in bruises from his fingers, and her eyes stared into nothingness. Henry recoiled, unable to believe what had happened. He had just killed the woman he had loved for 15 years, the mother of his children, his wife. "No, no, no." He grabbed his head, rocking back and forth. "What have I done? What have I done? There was a noise upstairs. Jacob or Zoe awakened by the screams. Henry froze, realizing the horror of the situation. What would he tell the children? What had their father done? At that moment, Christina's phone rang, lying next to her discarded bag. The name Derek lit up on the screen. Henry stared at the screen, and a new wave of despair washed over him. All of this was his fault. Because of this man who had destroyed their family, taken Henry's wife away from him, and now, indirectly, caused her death. But something even more terrifying occurred to Henry. He himself was to blame. His jealousy, his rage, his inability to let go, that was what had led to the tragedy. The phone continued to ring, and Henry sat next to Christina's body, realizing that his life as he knew it was over. All that lay ahead was darkness, guilt, and inevitable punishment. He heard the door to the children's room open upstairs, and light footsteps heading toward the stairs. Soon, Jacob or Zoe would come down and see the scene. Henry knew he had to do something, but he couldn't move. He looked at Christina's lifeless face and realized that he had not only ruined her life but his own, and worst of all, the lives of his children. The gift he had so carefully prepared for Christina had turned into a nightmare for everyone.